The University of Cape Town senior law lecturer Gaopalelwe Mathiba, 26, will become the youngest person in the Faculty of Law to obtain a PhD when he graduates on Friday, July 21st. Over the past 11 years, there have been only 5 PhD graduates aged 26 or younger, out of a total of 2,500 graduates from UCT. Mathiba's thesis is titled "Towards a Meaningful Engagement Approach to Mining-Induced Displacements in South Africa, a Legal Comparative Perspective." Well, for more on this, we're joined by the man himself, a senior law lecturer from the University of Cape Town. How, or should I be saying, Doctor? Very good afternoon. Thanks so much for speaking to us. I mean, I'm super excited that you're 26 and you've achieved this accolade. Just how do you feel?
Thank you so much, Hugo, for hosting me, and good afternoon to you and all the listeners of the Newzroom Afrika. Yeah, well, I must say that it's quite a fulfilling moment. I mean, having to scoop such a big academic achievement at my age is quite an honor. And what makes it even more of a great milestone is the fact that I have obtained it from the University of Cape Town, that is the best university in Africa, and fortunately it doubles up also as my employer of choice. So I'm very much proud, and I'm looking forward to being kept next week Friday.
Now let's take a look at your research topic. What inspired you to focus on this particular area of study?
Yeah, well, my research, Hugo, is really all about the advancing of human rights interest of mine-affected communities. I mean, you would remember, if I am to take you back, that in 2018, the South African Human Rights Commission released a very damning report about the socio-economic state of mine-affected communities in South Africa. I mean, that report documents so many, set evidences of how the mining companies often abuse these communities, because these communities, most of them are stricken by poverty, unemployment, and all manner of bad things and challenges. So my research is very much deliberate and focused in actually giving a voice and speaking on behalf of these communities by, among other things, being directly involved in policy reform engagements with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and also helping them to come up and foster new policy and practice reforms that may better advance and protect the interests of mine-affected communities. So my research is really one way of coming on board with a view of advancing solutions to address the plethora of challenges that befriend, or that that faces the mine-affected communities.
Now, I'd imagine that one of the challenges that many of these communities face is that you've obviously talked about the human rights violations and the displacements that we speak to. But let's talk about resolution to some of these challenges. What did your research come up with? Just how much of the problems, or how many of the problems that they face in these communities are actually resolved?
Yes, Hugo. So in South Africa, the picture, the resolution of this problem and challenge is quite a tough one, I must admit, because you would remember that there's this recent and very controversial decision, the Gaopalelwe matter. In that case, what basically happened, and this is the gist of my PhD thesis, what happened in the Gaopalelwe matter was that the High Court actually ruled to say that before the mine community, the community that is around the mining operations, can be removed or replaced for a mining operation to take place, that particular community must give permission or must give consent to that move. In other words, there should be no mining operations if the community that is occupying that land is not coming into party and giving away their consent. Now, on the other, that is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that the Minister of Mineral Resources is of the view that such decision is very problematic for many reasons. One of them is arguing to say that the decision is actually taking away from him the powers to grant mining permits and licenses to people or to mining companies that may approach him with applications for such. So there's a contestation of conflict. There's a conflict of interest here. On the one hand, mine communities are saying, no, before you, the Minister of Mineral Resources, before you can grant a mineral right to a particular mining company, you actually have to pass by us first and seek our consent. And only once we have given you the consent, when we agree for the mining operations to go ahead, you can then approve the mining license or permit of that particular mining company applicant.
Dr.
So
Mathiba,
the minister is actually
allow me to interject there, because a thought comes to mind, and that obviously is that potentially the community offer a checking mechanism, do they not? And the reason I suggest this is because when you're dealing with mega projects, they're often funded by powerful individuals that are very, very wealthy. And I'd like to imagine that when the community comes into in fact, the community is then able to put the minister in check. Does that contribute to some of your findings?
Yes, true. That's very correct, and a very interesting point you are raising, Hugo. That's exactly one of my recommendations, because one of the arguments that I raised there is the issue of divide and conquer that these mining companies often do, or their agencies, because they wouldn't go directly to the communities. They would send the agencies to go and engage or consult with those communities. So what would happen ordinarily is that the mining agencies or the mining representatives who would go to meet with the communities would simply meet with the king or the chief, with some selected elites that are close or having close proximity to the king. And they will be given, there have been so many reports of, the king and those who have close proximity to him having to enjoy some kickbacks from those mining company representatives. And then they would agree, give consent to the mining operators to proceed with the mining development. Whereas that would in actual fact not be the true reflection of what the community is all about. Because there are so many cases where the king would have given consent, whereas the community, the entire community, is actually in disagreement with a particular mine project. So there are a lot of those instances where that come to suffice. And one of the suggestion or recommendation that I make for practice change is actually for effective monitoring and evaluation tool to be put in place to make sure that we guard against those kind of unfortunate instances. And I make very clear and detailed recommendations on how exactly to go about that. And I am just glad that so far I've been given so much opportunity to work with the legal office of the DMRE to deliberate on some of these issues. So my research is not really an academic gymnastic or exercise. It's really affecting and having direct bearing on the real situations.
I'm inclined to ask, have you been facing any resistance to the research that you're doing? Because I'd like to think that from this conversation that there are many that would not support some of the recommendations that you're putting across.
Yes, indeed. But Hugo, someone has to do this. Someone has to confront and unpack this topic that everyone feels like is untouchable. Of course, there will be some voices of resistance against the recommendations that I put forth in my research. But really, I think that should not really be much of a concern to me. What I would see myself happy about is when these communities, their rights and interests are very much protected and taken into reasonable cognizance in policy making and practice decision making. So, of course, like for instance, I make an example of, I make a recommendation that South Africa should perhaps start thinking about adopting the FPIC principle, free, prior and informed consent principle, in its mining legal framework. That principle basically rubber stamps the Kolobeni judgment decision to say that before a mining permit or a mining mega project development can take place, there has to be free, prior, informed consent of the community that is yet to suffer or that is yet to be subjected to displacement, so that to make way for that particular development. So that topic, that concept of FPIC is very much controversial in the field, because especially from those scholars who are pushing the private investment narrative through their research, they are criticizing it because they are saying that it offers the mining communities some sort of what we call the veto power to exert the powers of the Minister of DMRE to grant mineral right license or permits and make it to reside with the mining communities. They say that's a very unconstitutional setup. But that's not what we are saying. What we are saying is that if we have this particular system in place, then most of these challenges and conflicts will be easily evaded.
Now, going to shift away from the academia for a little bit as we're running short of time. Now, in the read-up about you, you mentioned that your late mother strongly believed in education. Now, how's her influence shaped your academic journey? Just how does it feel to achieve this significant milestone without her at this time?
Yes, thanks, Hugo. No, that's correct. My mom passed on so many years ago when I was just 6 years of age. And she was a true educationalist. She believed so much in education. She would, profess and speak academic excellence in me every single day, as far as I can remember. So I know that if she was still alive, she would have been the most proud mother of all times at this moment, at this point in time. But it's a pity she's not here to enjoy and celebrate this big milestone with me. But I do have my very supportive family, the Mathiba family and the Munchusi family, especially my uncle, who has been very much instrumental to my academic progression, who is by the name Kama Mathiba, and my other uncle from the maternal side, who is Kotlatiba Munchusi and Haus Molamu. They have been very much instrumental in seeing to it that they support my academic progression and career choices. So, yeah, even if the absence of my mother would have been the most ideal thing to happen, but having those, joining me is quite a privilege and honor.
Well, we celebrate with you, Professor Gaopalelwe Mathiba, Senior Law Lecturer at UCT, will become one of the youngest professors on July 21st in over 11 years. Appreciate your time this afternoon.